Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. Today, we are tackling a monumental issue, something that I have addressed in bits and pieces here and there in isolated situations, but perhaps it's time to take a much larger look to see if mental disability is actually the new normal. What is going on with the majority of individuals in the world? What does it look like now versus 10 years ago, versus 20 years ago, versus 50 years ago? And what will it look like in another couple of years? We're tackling some large issues here in typical mind shock fashion with logic and reason at the forefront. I am, of course, your host, Bruce McGuire. If you want to help support the podcast, help logic and reason return to a world where it is quickly going extinct, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You could become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications if it's still not coming through. Like and comment and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. Okay, so YouTube has been acting up a little bit. If it continues to do so, I might seriously start thinking that perhaps there might be something to the controversial topics we are discussing not being approved by the powers that be at YouTube, because this is the second week now with quite a few glitches. I'm gonna have to ask around, see if it's just YouTube and it's for everybody. But yeah, we got Lord Zed in here, Dave Scott, Lucky Haskins, Titus 110. Lucky Haskins says, all caused by psychosis, living in a false reality, caused by the globe delusion, 100% on schedule as planned. Hold on a second there, Lucky Haskins. We're not going to go flat earth here for this one, although I'll probably be doing another flat earth Q&A within the next few days. But for this purpose, I mean, look how many so-called mainstream personalities, puppets, whatever you want to call them, propagandists. I mean, look at this goof Destiny. So this mentally disabled gamer just finds fame and fortune, and all of a sudden he's getting invited on Piers Morgan. He's debating Ben Shapiro. I mean, why are so many people giving this mentally disabled guy the light of day? I mean, I don't really get it. I mean, he's clearly got a severe mental disability. Are people just fooled by how fast he can talk? They think like the verbal diarrhea stream somehow adds IQ points? I mean, this guy's like an idiot savant when it comes to verbal diarrhea. I mean, I have to admit, his verbal diarrhea prowess is up there. It's up there. I mean, he's good at it. He's really good at it. But, I mean, there's no correlation to intelligence there. I mean, I don't even know if he's ever been accidentally correct about anything. I mean, maybe he has. I'm not saying he hasn't. I'm just saying I haven't seen him be accidentally correct about something, but maybe he has. Maybe he has. I mean, anybody in the chat, has Destiny ever been correct about something, accidentally or otherwise? I mean, usually he's just humiliating himself. Just complete and utter humiliation. I mean, it's almost like he's got a fetish for it. If he didn't have a mental disability, it's almost like it's some kind of fetish where he's just addicted to humiliating himself, proving how dumb he is. But I mean, is this the new American dream where even mentally disabled people like Destiny can rise to prominence? They can be invited on all these top podcasts. I mean, has he been on Joe Rogan? I mean, I don't know. Maybe he has. I don't think he has. But yeah, I mean, again, he's been on Piers Morgan. I mean, it's like there's so many mentally disabled goofs now that are just being treated as if not only are they not mentally disabled, but they're being treated as if they're actually intelligent and as if their opinion has some kind of validity. I mean, It's quite strange. We didn't quite have this in the past because in the past, decades ago, I mean, even propaganda mouthpieces, they at least understood basic English and basic logic. They might have pretended they didn't. They might have still been deceptive in their answers, but they at least they were able to fathom the basics. They were able to comprehend the basics. I mean, Destiny clearly can't. I mean, he just spews faith fallacies and clearly demonstrating that he doesn't even understand the basic definitions of words. I mean, it's weird. It's a weird thing. It's kind of hard to figure out. I mean, you even have older generation guys like Cenk from the Young Turks. I mean, that guy's got a clear mental disability. I mean, he's a bit older, but still. I mean, you have all these guys. I mean, Don Lemon on CNN. I mean, that guy, he doesn't know any of the basic definitions of anything. I mean, it's just pure goofery. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe the American dream is not dead. It's just morphed to where even these mentally disabled folks can get real jobs and be treated. I don't know. It's like a weird thing. It's almost like a humiliation ritual in and of itself, where it's kind of like an emperor has no clothes situation, where everybody's pretending they're not mentally disabled. It's really weird. I mean, even professional propagandists and liars back in the day, I mean, grifters, all of these people, back in the day, it wasn't apparent that they had severe mental disabilities. They were just liars and propagandists. Now, there's not even proof of comprehension from these talking heads. The reason I put Destiny in it, because he's the most obvious. I mean, this guy's not even on what? Like a 2-3-year-old comprehension level? Obviously, he can, again, his verbal diarrhea game, it's up there. I mean, it's up there with the best of them. He's like this mentally disabled savant where he just has this skill of spewing verbal diarrhea. But another skill, you would think he would be accidentally correct about more things. Because, I mean, he talks so fast, you would think he would accidentally be correct about more things. But it doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, I haven't seen any instances of that. I did one logical analysis when he was getting demolished by Zerka. I mean, Destiny, I mean, he's just always getting decimated. He should just change his name to Decimated Destiny. I mean, is he ever not getting decimated in a debate? Every single debate I've seen, it's just pure and utter decimation. Yeah, it's strange. I mean, Denise is here, Axiom. I mean, has anybody ever heard Destiny make a logical, coherent, or accidentally correct point about anything? I mean, admittedly, I mean, I can't tolerate him for long periods of time, so I haven't watched all the debates. But it seems like every snippet I pick out of any debate ever, it's just 100% fallacy and misunderstanding of basic definitions. I mean, what happened to all of the grifters and the propagandists who aren't mentally disabled? Like, where are they? I mean, it seems like nowadays everybody's coming out of the woodwork and they just have severe mental disabilities. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, another good example is Don Lemon. I mean, there's just no processing power. What does everybody in the chat think? I mean, are there any examples of Destiny being accidentally correct about something? So is this kind of a world where instead of it's one emperor has no clothes, that's just become the status quo for everybody? So if, let's say, 80% of the population is effectively mentally disabled, and everybody just kind of pretending they're not to spare feelings, post-trophy generation. Like, does that explain the state of the world? It kind of does. It kind of explains modern society where people like Destiny can just float through life, everybody around them pretending they're not mentally disabled, and they get invited on debate platforms. Everybody kind of pretends that they know what they're talking about to a certain extent. They pretend there's some kind of validity to the opinion. Even though, I mean, Destiny can't even follow. I mean, he's also one of the kings of non sequiturs. I mean, if you watch the debates, I mean, he just spams non sequiturs like a master. Like he's a master of non sequiturs, which isn't really a compliment because since there's no mental processing, I don't think he's aware that he didn't process the information given by somebody. he just starts spewing the verbal diarrhea. It's like it didn't occur to him that he didn't understand what was being said. So he'll change the subject 5 times, he'll straw man non sequitur, and it just goes on forever. Trex 32, but that doesn't explain it. Even if he's on meth or Adderall, I mean, there's plenty of non-mentally disabled people that are on meth and Adderall, and they can still follow the conversation. They'll just talk really fast. Yeah, well, I'm not sure if it's denial, because wouldn't he have to process the information first and then deny it? Like, there's no processing power. That's kind of what I'm addressing with this whole podcast. And it seems to be the new normal. I mean, just look at all these debates, not just flat Earth. Like, let's move away from flat Earth debates for a second, because that's a triggering topic. Like, even relatively standard debates. You know, you got goofs like Destin. I mean, it's kind of just, even in the mainstream, like Piers Morgan doesn't have a lot of processing. I mean, he has more processing than Destiny, but it just seems like a lot of these puppets, propagandists, grifters, whatever you want to call them, it doesn't really matter. Because back in the day, all these propagandists, grifters, and mouthpieces, they weren't basically completely mentally disabled like now. Like, they weren't spamming non sequitur. They at least, if they were being deceptive, they understood the point, and then they tried to kind of weave away from it and into whatever propaganda they were trying to push forth in decades past. But now, it seems like we can't even get to step one. We can't even get these people to even process what has been said accurately before responding. Like, Destiny starts responding before the other person even finishes, but he never understands what was said in the first place. I mean, it's a weird thing. I mean, on certain podcasts, was he on that Lex goof? I forget. What was his name? Is it Lex Friedman or whatever? That other big podcast, relatively big podcast. He had a few. I was skipping around that one too. There were pauses where it appeared Destiny was at least trying to understand. He still didn't, because the mental capacity's not there. That's why I'm labeling it just disability. Because it's like, regardless of whether he's trying to understand or not, the mental processing power's not there. Well, again, whether he is or isn't on the spectrum, you know, people can be on the spectrum and not mentally disabled. So we have here just, it's basically complete and utter mental disability. And I think Destiny actually used to be sharper, because even in his debate with John Zerka, he was just completely triggered, but he didn't seem to be, you know, borderline brain dead. Like, over the past few years, he's gotten way worse. It's like there's no processing at all. I mean, he might have processed some of Zerka's points, but in any of his newer, anything with the past year or so, it's like he's you know, he's like a borderline vegetable like Craig, but Craig of Fight the Flat Earth, he might be acting though, so I'm not sure. I don't think Destiny's acting. I think it's genuine mental disability. And again, there's a lot of people like it. Like, look at Don Lemon. Would a guy like Don Lemon ever be on any mainstream show 30 years ago? I mean, there were plenty of propagandist liars, but they weren't mentally disabled. I mean, does anybody actually think Don Lemon isn't mentally disabled? I mean, that guy has zero processing ability. I mean, yeah, he's obviously propagandized and lying, and there's denial going on. I mean, clearly. Lex is interesting, Tress 32, because supposedly this guy's like a super scientist, right? Let me look him up for a second. But yes, he seems to have a mental disability as well. Like, if you watch that one podcast he did with Michael Malice, it's like Lex couldn't even grasp the basic definitions of what is government, because they were talking about statism. And Lex, he couldn't even grasp the basic definition, but proceeded to talk about it for 2 hours. So Lex he's 40 years old, and that was a couple of years ago, so he was in his 30s when that was going on. He's a computer scientist. He went to Drexel University. Let's see. Oh, and MIT. Interesting. He also worked at Google. So, I mean, obviously this guy's a shill. I mean, that's painfully obvious. But the question, see, again, there were always shills. I mean, there were always shills back in the day. But they weren't mentally disabled. I mean, has the term useful idiot, has that evolved into useful mentally disabled person? Johnny Doman says maybe Destiny has early onset dementia brought on by the blue haired. Wow. I mean, it's not even dementia because even demented people aren't necessarily people who suffer from dementia. They're not necessarily mentally disabled because they still have moments of lucidity, etc., where they can function, sometimes at a high level. Aloha, Sarah. Yeah, so in if society, if the trophy generation has just caused the masses where everybody's the emperor with no clothes now, and just throughout all the education, aka indoctrination facility systems, through all of the school levels and universities, nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings, so it's like a whole new generation of mentally disabled people don't know they're mentally disabled. Yeah, maybe Destiny's on meth, maybe he's not. Again, there's mentally disabled people on meth and not on meth, right? So, and there's non-mentally disabled people on meth and not on meth. So, that's neither here nor there, but I mean that could explain his verbal diarrhea to an extent, but it doesn't explain the disability itself. So, does this explain all of the issues with modern society where let's say the majority of people, over 50%, are legitimately mentally disabled? But nobody ever told them. And then obviously they're too much of a narcissist. Like, obviously Destiny's too much of a narcissist to ever even consider the possibility that he's legitimately mentally disabled. So he'll never be able to move forward or actually learn from anything. So does that explain the state of the world? Because, I mean, Chank's been around for a while. He's probably the oldest guy I can think of that has a clear mental disability. Cenk Unger or whatever from the Young Turks. I mean, that guy, he can't process anything mentally. And he's older. So that's pretty much the only older guy I can think of. I mean, maybe Bernie Sanders, but Bernie could be intentionally, yeah, he could be acting. He very well could be. Actually, I'd have to lean no, because there was that one interview where he was asked, I think he was asked whether taxation was theft or not, and he got all triggered and just walked out. So, again, someone like Destiny, he wouldn't have even understood what was going on, so he would have never gotten pissed and walked out. Whereas Bernie had some kind of mental processing power to understand the question. I've never even seen Destiny comprehend a single question ever asked of him. So, yeah, no, I mean, it seems to be more of a recent generation thing. Last 10 years or so, one could even argue post 2012. I mean, 2012 does really seem to be an interesting year, doesn't it? Like, you can clearly divide society pre 2012 and post 2012. Obviously, 9/11 was a critical moment in history, but 2002 wasn't that drastically different. Even 2011 was quite different, but 2013, I mean, that's crossing the Rubicon, so to speak. I mean, it's completely different. It's like we shifted into a different dimension. Whereas 2002 to 2011, I don't know. I don't know. Now take 2002 and 2014. I mean, huge shift there. James B. Are you a parody account? An observation is not an accusation. And hallucinating something is baseless doesn't mean it's baseless. I mean, do we have another is James B another guy with a mental disability trying to prove the point here? Or was that like a satire comment? I don't know. Are you the same James that was like trolling here for the past couple years? I don't know. There was some kind of James that was either trolling or just another legitimately mentally disabled individual who wasn't understanding what was being discussed. Like, an observation is not an accusation. Trex32. Bill Maher has definitely lost IQ points. Guarantee the pot is part of the problem. Well, Bill Maher, okay, that he's an interesting one. I don't think he's mentally disabled though. I mean, he's extremely dumb, but I don't think, and obviously he plays stupid a lot, and he's deceptive, and he lies about a lot of stuff, no question. But I don't know if I would say he has a legitimate mental disability. Like he's the guy where I think he probably does understand most of the definitions and arguments. He might pretend he doesn't, and he might intentionally strawman and go to non sequiturs. Whereas I'm not sure that's intentional with Destiny. It's like there's no processing power. I don't know if I'd call him smart, but yeah, I wouldn't call him mentally disabled. Like not completely mentally disabled. Like Piers, I'm on the fence about. I think Piers might be playing stupid as well. But yeah, I mean, Destiny's like the perfect example though, because he goes on all these podcasts. He's even like, how does a guy with a mental disability get taken seriously by Ben Shapiro and gets put on the show? Or is this all some kind of weird psyop where they intentionally recruited a mentally disabled guy like Destiny? But even that doesn't make sense because didn't Destiny become popular just through streaming? Like he was just playing games? I mean, is that how he got his rise to fame? He simply streamed playing video games. I mean, the guy's 35 and he's effectively what? You know, I mean, if you're being generous, what? Like what he has the mental disability aside, like what is his maturity level? Like 13, 14? I don't know. Even if he wasn't legitimately mentally disabled. Well, pot affects people in different ways. The marijuana. And also depending on whether it's pure or whether it's laced with toxic chemicals. The good stuff versus the non-good stuff. Huge difference. Iwo Gina here. But yeah, I think Destiny kind of represents a societal problem and is the new American dream being able to be completely mentally disabled like Destiny, play video games online, and become rich and famous where people actually take you seriously or pretend to? I mean, okay, let's do a poll. I mean, who here thinks that Ben Shapiro actually takes Destiny seriously? Because he had him on his show for a supposed debate, and he at least pretended to take him seriously. I don't know if he actually did or he didn't. Johnny Doman said maybe Destiny's actually 5 years old but looks 40. Idiocracy, yes, yes. I mean, I guess we're kind of splitting hairs here on, like, was 2012 basically the crossing of the Rubicon, so to speak? Was it the delineation marker of year where mental disability no longer got called out and was accepted as the new normal in order to spare feelings? Because, like, what would the result be? Like, if someone actually told Destiny, revealed to him he had a legitimate mental disability. I mean, clearly this guy's a narcissist. I mean, that's obvious just from the way he talks and carries himself. Like, has the guy ever considered the fact that he could be wrong about something? So he would never believe it. I mean, he's too mentally weak. It's not just disability, it's weakness. There's plenty of smart people who are mentally weak. Yeah, I mean, this has nothing to do with the Mayan calendar, too. Like, I'm just legitimately going through the years because obviously 9/11 started tipping it. Like, that was the year it kind of started to decline. But honestly, 2002 wasn't that different. I mean, in the few months after, yeah, it was kind of somber. But the second half of 2002 wasn't that bad. 2003, 2004. And it was just like a steady decline. And then it's weird, like 2011 and 2013 are drastically different years. I mean, I'm averaging here. Obviously, it wasn't New Year's Day 2012. It's just the decline was gradual, but then you stop and take a look around, and 2013 is a lot different than 2008. I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to say. So most people do not think that Ben Shapiro takes destiny seriously. Well, only 62%. 38% say that he does. That's weird. I don't know. I mean, Ben Shapiro has a lot of blind spots. So maybe destiny's one of his blind spots, obviously. I don't know. I mean, I would never accuse Shapiro of being mentally disabled, but blind spots, yes. Shapiro has a lot of blind spots. Okay, so yeah, but it's not just Destiny either. I mean, there's plenty of other full time streamers. What was that guy's name? I totally forgot most of them, but most of them probably are effectively mentally disabled and then get fame and fortune, etc. Now, there's a lot of dumb people in the '90s, early 2000s who also got fame and fortune. I wouldn't accuse them of being mentally disabled though, like legitimate. Like what are those guys? The Island Boys or whoever, and then there's who's that other young punk? The tall, skinny, lanky guy who's super famous for some reason. He's like all over TikTok and Kick and YouTube. Man, I totally forgot his name, which is probably a good thing. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Destiny's a degenerate promoting degeneracy, but no, the question was whether he's mentally disabled or not. But Neon, there you go. Shane 187 Thompson knows exactly who I'm talking about. Like that Neon guy, he appears to have a mental disability as well, with zero testosterone running through his veins. I mean, Destiny's also kind of like the king of soy, but Neon especially. Yeah, Neon was the guy's name. Like, how do people like that get famous? It's kind of weird. There's also another guy who goes around harassing people. I forgot his name. Like that short guy. I think he might even hang out with Neon. I don't know. I think they all kind of hung out with John Zerk at a point, but I wouldn't call John Zerka mentally disabled. He's almost like the anomaly. Like Zerka's the anomaly. Like all these other streamer guys, they seem to have legitimate mental disabilities. Although Zerka appears to have some testosterone as well. I wonder if there's a correlation there. The Catch Me Outside. Is it no, it's not. I don't know if it's Fauci. Let me check. The Catch Me Outside. She's a genius compared to Destiny, though. Oh no, it's not Fauci. Was it Jack or Jake or something like that? Like a short kid who goes around with that bodyguard. Yeah. I think it was Doherty or something. Yeah, how do people like that get rich and famous? I think, actually, in his case, I think someone did a expose on him, and his dad was like super rich. His dad's super rich or something. So they kind of just bought all of that fame and fortune. I'm not sure about Neon, though. I think Neon might have been more of an organic rise to fame, possibly. But that goes to show, though, the supporters they have. Because if the supporters are all mentally disabled, no way. He was on Dr. Phil. That's crazy. Oh, Dr. Phil's another good example. Dr. Phil's kind of borderline, too. Because, oh man, Dr. Phil. Yeah, oh man, where would you put him on a scale with like Cenk Unger? I mean, those guys, I mean, they are dumb as bricks. I don't know who David Pacman is. He asked Destiny if he had autism in a debate. What was Destiny's response? I mean, autism isn't mental disability, though. There's plenty of smart autistic people. Yeah, Jack Doherty is tough. It's tough, but again, is this a whole society has no clothes situation instead of yeah, Dr. Phil is tough, but he there were several instances where he didn't even understand certain words. I might do an analysis with Phil, a logical analysis with Dr. Phil. Like it's weird. It's like certain things he seems to understand. Like whereas Destiny doesn't seem to understand anything about anything. But Dr. Phil does seem to understand quite a bit, but then it also shocked me how in certain instances he couldn't understand very basic points. So yeah, I don't know. Like gun to the head, I would not be able to claim definitively that Dr. Phil isn't mentally disabled. No, cognitive dissonance is not a mental disability. Cognitive dissonance is a temporary state regarding certain topics and beliefs. that could occur to both really dumb and really smart people depending on which beliefs they hold. It's simply not being able to rectify evidence contradicting a belief system and having both those conflicting concepts in mind at once. So that, yeah, cognitive dissonance is not a mental disability. What's the guy's name who's always putting down females smoke cigars? Talking about Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is incredibly smart. He's intentionally trolling most of the time. I mean, it's so obvious he's trolling and everybody falls for it. He's pretty smart, though. Like, yeah. He's also, I don't think he's that young. I think he's quite a bit older than Destiny. I'm not sure. Oh, Lucky, how dare you? Trump and Biden are in their own categories. I don't think either one of them is mentally disabled. I mean, Biden's always obviously been dumb, but he was kind of like a useful idiot. I wouldn't call him mentally disabled either. And Trump's pretty smart. Shane, what he's 7. I think Tate's a psyop. Expand on that. We need to do. I actually did a logical analysis on Tate versus that CNN report or BBC reporter. I mean, he decimated that poor woman, but she asked for it. She might have had a mental disability. I mean, that's another thing, too. Like, it seems like a lot of younger reporters definitely have mental disabilities. I mean, how widespread is mental disability? I'll do a poll at the end of this, but I think I think more than 50% of the population might be legitimately mentally disabled, and that's why nobody's calling each other out on it. Because it's like the lowest common denominator became the average denominator. And that seems to be why the world is in the state that it is. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of mental issues as well. I mean, mental health is obviously. I don't want to cross over into mental health too much because obviously, intelligent people can have mental health issues, and mentally disabled people can also have mental health issues. But I don't want to really cross over that podcast here. I want to talk about just intellectual capacity here. Capacity, regardless of other mental health issues. So Shane 187 Thompson, I think most of these guys are funded from the CIA. Have you been in here before, Shane 187 Thompson? I don't recall your username, or at least not your avatar. Iwo Gina says Dr. Phil is disabled for sure. Not even a doctor, never licensed in California. It's tough with Dr. Phil because at least, like I said, Dr. Phil has moments where he seems to understand things. Like Destiny, I've never seen Destiny comprehend a single point made in any debate. Okay, I see what you're saying, Lucky Haskins. Used to be done through the music owned and controlled bands. Now it's these YouTube heroes. Okay, so you mean streamers? Some of them are like big on Kick. I don't even know if they're that big on YouTube, but okay, okay. Well, no, because you're making some interesting points, Shane 187 Thompson. That's why I asked, because, yeah, I mean, obviously, interesting points are always welcome on the lives or in the comments or wherever. You also seem to know a lot about all of these people, probably more than me. I don't follow most of these streamer groups, but Lucky Haskins. Good. That's an interesting observation. It kind of makes sense because if they're being watched so much, but let's compare though. Like all these big music stars or rock stars, I mean, they were dumb. Don't get me wrong. These were usually not intellectuals, even in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s. But I wouldn't call them mentally disabled. Whereas now, I mean, some of them were middle school dropouts and they could comprehend more than Destiny or even Lex Friedman in certain situations or even Dr. Phil. You see what I mean? It's not really about, yes, obviously the CIA would want hands on anybody that has a large audience. Shane 187 Thompson says, I think everything is fake, all about influence and control. That might be an appeal to extremes logical fallacy. I don't think everything is fake. I think people slip through the cracks. I think they do. We actually analyzed an interview from Mel Gibson the other night where he kind of was leaking some Illuminati Hollywood secrets, so to speak, and it looked like the interviewer wasn't happy about it. I wish, Sarah says, I wish Eugenia Cooney would get some help. I have no idea who that is. Well, the other thing, too, like a lot of debates, like even with Craig of Fight the Flat Earth, like these audiences are egging on these mentally disabled people to continue humiliating themselves. But these people actually think they're doing a good job or winning these debates. You see this all the time. Like the Whatever podcast. You guys have seen that one? Like the Whatever podcast. There's some, there are like some girls on there, like lawyers, or they're very argumentative, and people are pretending they're good debaters. And then they're going on actual debates on big podcasts. It's like they clearly have mental disability. I mean, they don't even know the basic definitions of words for the debate, and they're being egged on by literally tens of thousands or more as if their opinion is valid, as if they're winning, while they're humiliating themselves. I mean, that's why this podcast is titled "Is Mental Disability the New Normal?" Because is that the new normal? All right, let me see who you guys are talking about. Eugenia Cooney. I don't think I've ever seen this individual. So she's 29, from Massachusetts, American YouTuber. I mean, okay, does she have a particular niche? Like, I'm kind of talking about almost in the context of debates. Like again, the Whatever podcast is a very popular podcast where there's some, people come to kind of sort of debate, but they don't know what they're talking about, and they get egged on. Lucky Haskins says, information is certainly the weapon of choice for those who control. Are you saying there's info wars going on, Lucky? Iwo Gina said, artists have never claimed to be intellectuals, just had insane talent. Yeah, that's true, but also my point is, even though they never claimed to be intellectuals, they're still smart. They still had a certain baseline. They weren't mentally disabled. Some of them actually were pretty smart. But just in general, they weren't completely mentally disabled individuals. They were either average, maybe below average, but some of them were high school dropouts. But they could at least carry a conversation and understand a previous point to go to the next point. Because Destiny can't do that. Like some of these other goofs can't do that. Shane187 Thompson says, some probably don't even know they're being controlled. CIA, yeah, useful idiots. I did a podcast on useful idiots. But there's a difference between an idiot and someone who's completely mentally disabled. Like, we could also take, because I think for useful idiots, I might have even had Greta Thunberg in the thumbnail for that one. Now, I know she has some kind of mental issues. I think her parents even admitted it, and her handlers keep her on a short leash. She'd be more in the, I mean, I don't know, I think she could carry a normal conversation, though. But can Destiny? Like, I don't know, I don't think Destiny can. I've never seen him do it. Lucky Haskins says, the system was designed to police itself from within. I mean, yeah, we're going back to the Matrix and the Mr. Smith effect, of course. Iwo Gina says, she doesn't ever say anything. She talks in circles, and she's constantly confronted with eating disorders and her imprisonment. Eugenia Cooney cannot form a sentence anymore. Well, that's pretty sad. She might still be smarter than Destiny, though. Verbal diarrhea doesn't mean you're smart. Lord Zed says, what about Yoko Ono? She claimed to be an intellectual. Yeah, that's a question mark for me. Denise says, Bruce, what was the next movie to watch after Lakeview Terrace? I can't remember. Oh, it was definitely a conspiracy movie. Oh, what was it? Oh man, I actually still haven't watched Lakeview Terrace. We need on the next Q&A. That's the homework for the next Q&A. It was a conspiracy movie, though. I do remember that it was a conspiracy. Is anybody in here that was in here on the last live Q&A? Was it Sun UV Liberty who recommended the third movie for the watch list? Running Scared was the first. Oh, by the way, I do have an update on that. I'll do it on the next Q&A, though. On why Oleg's mom killed herself at the end of the movie. But The third movie, the movie after Lakeview Terrace, I'm pretty sure that was a conspiracy movie. Oh, The Game with Michael Douglas. I think it was The Game. Yeah, it was The Game with Michael Douglas, if I remember correctly. Way to get everything off track, Denise. No, I needed a reminder on that too. So good. Yeah, Lakeview Terrace and The Game are the next movies, I believe. Ethan W. in the house. I put forth evidence that disability is the new norm in the form of the NASA Astronautics Jobs Program for the Gifted and Disabled. This program includes community outreach via McToon, Fight the Flat Earth, and Bryant Myers. I don't think. Why are you putting Bryant Myers in? Bryant Myers is not mentally disabled. He was so triggered in the topic, but I think on different topics he'd be fine. Whereas McToon and Fight the Flat Earth, I'm not sure. I mean, they might be mentally completely gone. Ali says mentally deficient people all operate on the same frequency of cognitive dissonance and presuming they know the facts before research. Well, that's also crosses over into the Dunning-Kruger effect. Cognitive dissonance is simply the discomfort of being confronted with opposing ideas. Dunning-Kruger is assuming competency beyond true competency. My last name, mental disability is pushed through the making rock stars out of the mentally challenged. Iwo Gina Bruce, have you seen Poor Things with Emma Stone? Not really. Is that like one giant humiliation ritual? I saw some articles where it seems to be very depraved and degrading for her. I also can't stand that guy who played the Hulk in the Marvel movies. Is he in it with her? I actually like Emma Stone. I liked her other movies, but this one's definitely not the type of movie I would want to watch. I don't like watching any of that depraved Hollywood nonsense. The filth. I mean, it just looks like filth. Deviancy. Yes, Shane, what do you say, Thompson? Craig is as goofy as they come. Lucky Haskin, I think Bryant is very weak-minded. Just my yes, he's very weak. He's very mentally weak, but I wouldn't. Mental weakness versus mental strength is not the same as mental disability. Well, it's not surprising that filth gets promoted for the Oscars. I actually have a long podcast coming up, a deep dive into humiliation rituals in the Illuminati. And it's not just about, I mean, it's about Hollywood, but it's not specifically on what goes on screen in movies either. Oh, Ruffalo. Oh, man, Ruffalo. That guy is rough. It is too rough. That guy seems to have a mental disability as well. I mean, I don't know if he's actually mentally disabled, but that guy's dumb. Daniel Isn't Real. That's the name of the movie. I've never even heard of it. But yeah, there does seem to be a normalizing of mental disability intentional too. It's just, yeah, it's kind of scary and it kind of crept up too. Again, let's look at pre 2012 versus post 2012. I mean, it's everywhere too. Like the White House press secretary, like she couldn't even process basic words or basic questions. Like the press secretaries of the past, like even Jen Psaki or whatever her name was, she was simply deceptive. She understood the questions and intentionally sidestepped them or lied. Whereas whoever the new press secretary is, I mean, that one, the mental capacity is just not there. So it almost doesn't matter whether she wants to tell the truth or not. She's not understanding any of the questions in the first place. So yeah, it's a very disturbing trend. It's just like the protecting of feelings over reality. What are we going to call it? Feels over reals. I've heard that phrase thrown around. See, back in the day, it was reals over feels, and society prospered. Like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Even early 2000s. I mean, I would say, I mean, obviously, yeah, you could say post 9/11 ushered, it started the snowball of feels over reals. I'm gonna put a poll up on that. Let's see. Let's see who agrees with that. Because at a certain point, nobody even cared whether or not there were weapons of mass destruction. It was all about, feeling that there was some kind of vengeance for an event which may or may not have transpired as reported on the Idiot Box. If you haven't checked out the 9/11 Jumbo podcast on MindShock, check that out. My name, my last name says they are trying to move real life to digital life, but on certain sensitive topics, mentally disabled are pushed to be the rock stars in order to ridicule the topic. Monty says the fear of offending, then being judged, has made folks silent on even some of the most ridiculous alternate ways of being. Well, yeah, it's almost like common sense just went flat out extinct. Like, common sense is controversial. And again, we go back to what is the year of the transition. I think 2012 is the crossing of the Rubicon. And then COVID was kind of like cementing everything. Lucky Haskin says, I saw the Monica Clinton propaganda as a huge turning point in the slide to idiocracy. I mean, there were a lot of moments like that, but it wasn't like all day, every day, even in the mundane. See the difference? Like, there were definitely, moments like that. Like, that's a good example. But now it's like all day, every day on social media. It's the celebration of pretending mental disability isn't disability. I mean, I think some of it is too, like, people aren't really, like, people don't have discipline or dedication anymore. So instead of achieving things, they have to feel special about being outliers. Like, what happens when the LGBTQ whatever, when alphabet soup becomes the 90% of all people, if that happens, then they can't use that, or even if it becomes 60, 70%, they can't use that to feel special. So what's next? Oh, wow. Why are you bringing up The Virgin Suicide, Sarah? That is an incredibly good movie, especially the cinematography, the soundtrack, the acting. That is a phenomenal film, Sarah Catherine. Why'd you bring it up, though? Lucky Haskins does not compare to 9/11. Iwo Gina says people are even lying about having legitimate disabilities and getting caught. Yeah, here's the other thing too. Like, whatever happened to integrity? Like, back in the day, even in the 90s. See, yeah, even in the early 2000s, 2012 was definitely an interesting year. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, and before, like, it just seemed like integrity was something that people wanted to have. So they would only lie in extreme circumstances. Now, in the social media age, post 2012, everybody's lying 24/7 and nobody cares. Does anybody else notice that? Seems like everybody agrees with 9/11 starting the snowball of feels over reals. I mean, it's just so fascinating because, like, what started the trophy generation? Like, why out of nowhere were parents just so, like, not having, like, they just don't want their kids to have any kind of discomfort or thinking they lost something or feeling bad in any way? Like, where did that start? Because that was pre 9/11. I started noticing that probably the late 90s. I don't know, maybe even early in that definitely was not a thing in the 80s. That was not a thing in the 80s. Let me see if I can find this clip. It was so hilarious. It was popular a number of years back. Let me see if I have it. I remember I spent like an hour looking for it once and I couldn't. I wonder if I ever found it and saved it. But who here is a little bit older? In the 80s it wasn't a thing to go feels over reals. Like if a kid did something bad, the parent would punish them. They wouldn't try to spare them or blame someone else. In general, I mean obviously there were bad apples. In the early 90s, I don't remember it being a thing either. In the late 90s, it might have started to become a thing. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Just general discipline of children. I think it was the late 90s. I don't think we could blame 9/11 for that. I think in like 98, 99, just from my recollection, it seemed like a growing number of parents wanted to protect their kids from feeling any kind of discomfort and the beginning of the trophy generation. Is that accurate? I mean, does anyone have any theories on how exactly that started? Because that was definitely pre 9/11, and even post 9/11, it didn't have a huge jump. It looked like it was a slow creep that started in the late 90s. And then obviously by 2012, it's full blown. Like full blown trophy generation and the consequences that follow. Lucky Haskins says in the 70s, your neighbor might spank you if you needed it. Well, also, even in the 60s, 50s, 40s before my time, from what I've heard from older generation, like strangers on the street, I mean, they wouldn't spank kids as far as I know, but they would provide words of discipline if kids were misbehaving, and the kids would listen, or even just some kind of guidance, and they'd be taken seriously, like as a stranger, like in the 40s, walking around the street. If like a kid did something bad or questionable, and an adult stranger like gave him a talking to, they would take seriously the words of the stranger that they didn't even know. And there was just this understanding that the adult stranger, what they were telling the child was good for them and true. And yeah, there was a certain level of respect and trust. Obviously that's all gone now, but back in the day that was a thing. I'm trying to pinpoint the exact year. Do people know what I'm talking about? Where in the late 90s, maybe I don't even remember 97. I would confidently say 98, 99. Parents started really, really trying to shelter kids from any kind of discomfort, or that they, weren't good at something or whatever. It was the whole, believe in yourself. Actually, it's partially to blame, obviously, the feminist agenda. But do you remember that media campaign that whatever you can do, I can do better? And it was like little girls versus boys or whatever, that girls are just as good as boys at sports, or they're just as strong, just as fast. Does anybody remember that campaign? There was like a lot of Olympians that were part of it too, both male and female. That might have started some of it by the late. That was probably mid 90s, but by the late 90s, it's like you weren't. It was never that you weren't good at something. It always had to be a different reason. And the feelings, there was this shift into feels over reals. I'm not seeing anybody in the chat who's kind of had similar observations that in the late 90s was the beginning of maybe 96. I'm just throwing this out there. But where was the shift to trophy generation and sheltering children from any kind of criticism about their abilities, that their actions, something could be their fault, they need to take accountability and responsibility? Because early 90s and before, those were all, it was practically common sense that needed to be done. When the sitcoms went on, Iwo Gina says early 2000s. When TGIF ended. Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember the female climbers. I'm trying to find this one video on generations. It's so funny. It's really short, too. Oh, I just found it. Brilliant. Brilliant. Hold on 1 second. I'll put it up. You guys have probably seen it before, but this is going to be funny. See, let's see if YouTube prevents me from putting this on the screen like it did with the occult NASA Air Force patches. They shut down our whole stream that night. So this will be a good test, because if this goes up without a hitch, then something might be afoot. Uh-oh. What the? Oh, that's pretty interesting. It's not letting me do it. Okay, so maybe it's not, maybe they weren't specifically censoring the occult NASA Air Force patches. Oh, that's really weird. This video is great, though. I'm gonna just brute force spam click it until it goes through. That seemed to work last time. Okay, here we go. Oh wow, it's like playing so slow. I thought it had music too, but I don't know. Guess not. Now we need to listen to this with music. Huh. What is going on with YouTube? It's been so weird the past week. Let me see. Alright, let's see if I can get a better version of this video to play with music. Hope we don't get copyright struck. It says it's original sound. Maybe it won't, but... Okay, let's try this again.
Hit it, hit it, hit it, hit it, get it, get it, get it, get it. Ow, ow, ow. Show them, girl, yeah. Boom, boom, bow, bow, boom, 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 bow, 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 boom, boom, bow.
You guys seen this one before?
Hit it, hit it, hit it, hit it, get it, get it, get it, get it. Ow, ow, ow. Show them, girl, yeah. Boom, boom, bow, bow.
Is this accurate?
Boom, 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 bow, 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 boom, boom, bow, 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 boom, boom. Ow, grrr.
I like the attitude of the 80s.
Hit it, hit it, hit it, hit it, get it, get it, get it, get it. Ow, ow, ow. Show them, girl,
It's pretty
yeah.
old. It's a pretty old
Boom,
video
bow,
as well.
bow, boom, 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 bow, 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 boom, boom, bow, bow, bow.
What is everybody's thoughts on this? Is this an accurate representation of generational differences? The first one's awesome because it's kind of like it doesn't even warrant any kind of response. But the 80s one is great because you know there's going to be some attitude and some words exchanged. He doesn't even look at the door. Born in 1970, doesn't even look at the door. That's brilliant. But it's almost like you could see the testosterone level drop and the soy rise. It's like an inverse relationship. When the testosterone's flowing, no issue. Slight drop in testosterone, rise in attitude, and then and then all of a sudden, the soy really increases quite a bit. He even has more of a feminine look in the last two. I mean, obviously the last one, but even the one before where he kind of goes, ow, my shoulder, there's even a feminine look on his face. The other thing too, like, is it I think there's also a sense of purpose that was lost. Because in the 70s and 80s, there was a sense of purpose and optimism for life. Now it's kind of lost where, like, mentally disabled streamers like Destiny and Neon, like, they can get famous off of zero skill, and it's just like, what's the state of the world? Because back then obviously people got lucky, but it wasn't this many mentally disabled people getting lucky, so to speak. And it seems like hard work and discipline and integrity, they used to be valued in previous generations. Now they're not. So what does that mean? I think it might also, yeah, Cassidy knows what I'm talking about. You could see the look on his face. It's very well acted. Very well acted. Those born in the 90s, there's a slight increase of femininity. And then it just goes insane. I mean, I'll bring up one more video here just because it's sort of related um to what I'm talking about in terms of outlook, just general outlook towards life. So let's look at this.
No, if you don't go, the shine if you don't glow. Hey now,
Does it at the highest rate? And so, like, how can optimism? Because obviously we have inflation is out of control. Technically times are worse than the Great Depression in many ways. You have more people living with their parents. You have record homelessness. You have record mental health issues. And, how can people be optimistic with these kinds of numbers? Now, this isn't a Debbie Downer podcast. Obviously, there's always a way to persevere. Just in terms of general outlook, can you blame people for their outlook? And now, like, we're in full-blown idiocracy. I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's pretty tough. What can really be said here? Monty says, I've seen some young adult freak when injured. Seriously, how dangerous can 21 years of screens be? I mean, very. Yeah, Iwo Gina, it seems like the less work you actually do, the more money you can get, the more idolized you are. So, okay, there's some caveats there, because even back in the day, there were some incredibly smart rich people who didn't do any work and had a ton of money, but integrity was still valued back in those days. Now you have no integrity. There's no integrity being valued anymore. So that seems to be so destabilizing that everything else doesn't seem to really matter. What started in 79? The yeah, I mean, you could zoom out more. This chart is just from 85. That sounds accurate, Axiom. I believe 72 was the last great year, but I mean, things take time to be noticed. So this chart is just, starting from 85, but yeah. Yeah, late 70s would probably be a little more accurate, but the 80s were still a decade of. Let me read a comment here. Does anybody listen to 80s synth music or even modern synthwave that is made to sound like the 80s? I mean, I can't play anything on here, but there's some interesting comments here, like bands like The Midnight. Anybody listen to The Midnight? Yeah, Iwo Gina, work smarter, not harder was always around, but integrity kind of, it was a base. Like integrity and hard work was still valued because you do have to work harder to figure out how to work smarter. But as long as you were a productive member of society, I mean, playing video games online, is that truly productive? Like, what has Destiny done to make the world a better instead of worse place? Yeah, there were some fluctuations, Cassidy, regarding interest rates. This chart is simply relative to income. This doesn't really take into account interest rates. I'm gonna read some comments here from the Midnight videos. Let me see here. I'm trying to find. There were some interesting comments. I should have saved them. It actually relates to what we're talking about here in terms of the 80s. Okay, I'm trying to find which video it was on because there were some very interesting comments of people who were kind of observing all of this. Gunship also. Let's see. Some of these were funny. In the 80s, people were saying the future is going to be awesome. And then 2023, man, the 80s were awesome. Or take me back to the 80s. There are also a lot of people are saying that in the 80s there was just this aura of hope that things were going to be better. Whereas now it seems like there's a lot more hopelessness. Now, obviously, everybody's situation was different, but Shane, what 87 Thompson says, rap music has crippled society, promote degeneracy, which influences the influencers, which now influences our children. I mean, what kind of rap music though? Because you got Immortal Technique type. I mean, you're talking about degenerate rap music. I mean, there's plenty of rap music that's pretty good and promotes hard work and integrity. I mean, I don't know about the mainstream stuff now. I'm not arguing that it's like Cardi B or any of these other, mumble rap nonsense garbage. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the rap of the 80s and the early 90s was pretty solid. Some of it's really motivational too. About overcoming difficulty, etc. Iwo Gina says O'Reilly's Auto Parts sells a flux capacitor online. So, yeah, I mean, you could make an argument that the 80s were the last great decade. We actually talked about that. You could also make that argument for the 90s. Now, trying to say what was better, the 80s or 90s, I mean, that's, we're going to have to do a dedicated podcast on that. I mean, a lot of people are simply saying that the aura was simply different in the 80s. Like, people were genuinely happy and excited just to be alive. And there was a certain sense of wonder. Like, technology was moving forward and it was cool and exciting, but it didn't cripple social communication like it does now. And it was still relatively limited. I mean, it's kind of hard not to really consider just the aura, because I know what these people are talking about. I remember the aura. I think it was still there in the early 90s. I mean, even by the late 90s, I mean, obviously, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to really delineate, but I'm trying to find. There was some really interesting comments here. Let's see if I can find them. Oh, I think I found it. It's kind of interesting, too, that both younger and way older people, like people that lived through the 70s and 60s, some of them still say the 80s were the best. Because a lot of people say whatever you were, a late teen through your 20s, you're going to think that was the best decade. But there's clearly plenty of evidence to the contrary of that, because there are people who were much older than that who still say the 80s was the best, or even younger, who prefer the 80s to the 90s depending on their age. I find it pretty fascinating. I mean, obviously a lot of it is just the ability to communicate. I mean, here's an interesting comment. This wasn't the one I was looking for, but Doomsday971 said the 80s was the last decade where we still had an innocence about us, where TV shows still had a moral lesson to teach, where the good guys defeated the bad guys, where there was an energy to everything that most everyone could recognize. I was still a young kid during this time and remember learning many lessons just from watching TV. You can't do that today. For anyone that lived through the decade, I'm sure you could agree with what I'm saying. In today's world, we've lost that innocence, and I'm afraid we'll never get it back. If I had the chance to go back, I would without hesitation. Everything seemed just right. That's not the comment I was looking for. That was a decent one, though. I'm trying to see if I can find. I should have just saved it because it was pretty interesting. Lord Zed says the Bulls made the 90s pretty rad. I don't know, I like the Bulls of the 80s too. Post Michael. Cassidy Smokes asked, what would Steven Seagal think about all of this, I wonder? Man, you guys are in for a treat. I'm going to play my favorite commercial of all time, which I believe encompasses the aura and the atmosphere of the 80s better than anything in existence. Yeah, Denise, that's a great point too. Denise said we had it much easier financially than the young people do today. And that's another level of stress too, because back in the 80s, like you could afford to raise an entire family on a single income with a decent house. I mean, not a huge mansion, but a decent house, a decent car. I mean, life, it's just, you didn't have to be 100% overstressed about life all the time. Now, of course, there were people living in poverty that were, but there was enough people that weren't, that just, there was just this optimism, I guess is a good way to put it. There was a certain amount of optimism that doesn't quite exist today. My name, my last name. 90s lived off the 80s. The 90s died in 1998 when Dr. Bill Gates released Windows 98. South Park had a field day on that one. Someone get me Bill Gates over here. I thought you fixed this expletive Windows. You didn't like Windows Millennium, my name? Windows Millennium. I think I'm the only person who liked Windows Millennium. There was some kind of corporate version of Windows Millennium that actually didn't crash as much. I think I had that version. And I was always wondering why people hated it so much because my version didn't crash as much as everybody else's. But I think I had not just the corporate. I think there was a few different versions. One of them, there was some kind of corporate or enterprise version that was a lot more stable than the regular Windows Millennium. But I didn't think Windows 98 was that bad. Yeah, I know Windows Millennium was different. I was just comparing because Windows Millennium was the one after 98. And everybody hated it, but I actually thought I didn't think it was that bad, but I guess that was just me. Alright, hold on. I'm trying to find this one comment, and I'm gonna play the greatest commercial of all time. The MindShock approved commercial. Oh, don't get me started on Y2K, CK. I talk about this all the time. Y2K did happen. They just didn't disclose it. Oh, we got some Windows 2000 fans in the house. Yeah, Windows 2000 was good. Windows 7 wins. You guys didn't like Windows Vista? Windows Vista with the secure, if you manually, Windows Vista was really underrated. It actually was one of the fastest Windows if you removed all the security bloatware manually. I mean, if you were technologically inclined, you could actually, I did that, and Windows Vista was actually phenomenal if you did that. Flatman B said Windows Vista was hot trash unless you removed all the security bloatware manually. Then it actually ran faster than any other Windows. I'm not sure if that's still true, but as of, I don't know, 5 years ago, that was still true. And yes, I ran the test myself. Did I just reveal I'm a computer nerd? Yeah, Y2K happened. They just didn't disclose the breaches and the security shutdown. Like, what would you expect them to do? Like, if if the U.S. security went down for an hour, they're not going to tell everybody, "Oh, by the way, our system actually did go down." Yeah, I might have to do a dedicated episode on that. All right, hold on. Let me find this one comment about the 80s, and then I'm going to play the greatest commercial of all time, encompassing the feeling of the 80s. Man, why can I not? I should have definitely saved it. Man, I never learned my lesson about saving comments, because then I could never find them in situations like this. I mean, a lot of it probably also had to do with like video games being in their infancy, because people were just more social. You'd have like arcades, skating, like you'd be going out more even as younger kids. Now everybody just plays video games at home. And also nobody cared about being politically correct. Is that a factor? Cuz now it's all about feels over reels and policing thoughts and humor. All right, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find this comment, man. Oh, maybe. Let's see. Hmm. A lot of people saying that if they could go back to the 80s, they would and never return. I guess I'm gonna try to summarize it, but it was an interesting nexus because you had a jump in technology over the 70s. Like, you had a huge jump in technology throughout the 80s, particularly in the mid to late 80s. And then you also had everything was kind of vibrant. Everything was colorful and vibrant, and it kind of reflected people's happiness to just be alive. Because coming off of the 70s, the Vietnam War, and then before that, the Korean War, and then before that, World War II, there was just a certain amount of optimism in the air. I guess that's the best, and a nexus, a very unique nexus of technology meeting, living your life for real, not digitally. And of course, everything being so much more affordable. Because a lot of goofs are telling young people just suck it up. But as you can see on screen, it's not that easy. Inflation skyrocketed so much. I guess carefree is also an interesting word. Everything was more carefree in the 80s. Like, both kids and adults kind of, regardless of how old you were throughout the 80s, it seems everybody agrees. Like, even adults with jobs that already had jobs in the 80s still said it's all carefree. So it's not just about being young in the 80s, because even older people in the 80s, they still said everything was just more carefree. It was just more fun to be alive. Solar Atom, good point. Hulkamania was running wild, brother. That's a good point, Solar Atom. That is an excellent point. Flatman B says games ran better when people were two genders. Wow. I don't remember the song, CK. It was, or hold on a second. It was either the midnight. It was probably the midnight, but there was another band. Trying to remember. Actually, why don't I just go into my history? That would be that would be too easy, wouldn't it? Let me go through history and see. FM 84 possibly. Carefree is kind of the vibe everybody's kind of stating. Everything was just more carefree and everybody was happier. I mean, that's an interesting point. The average person was happier in the 80s. Again, obviously, financial situation was a factor. Certain amount of optimism was a factor. Still being grounded by integrity is a factor because that's all gone. So it seems like these are all factors. I can't find the comments, so I'm just gonna put up the what I believe is the greatest commercial in the history of commercials, and we will round out the podcast with that. And I hate it when I can't find a comment that I really want. Also, possibly morally, there was a great sense of right and wrong. Whereas now everything's kind of like gray areas are celebrated. So I guess that's probably also a part of it. I mean, a lot of people say that, nuance is important, but that does make things less simple, doesn't it? I mean, nuance is important, but just in examining the decades and, a certain sense of carefree, happy to be alive, it's, who's got time for nuance when you're happy? So just give me one more second. I will bring up the greatest commercial. We're probably going to get flagged for copyright here, but oh well. We're going big, and then we're going home. And let me just catch up on some of these comments. Must have been nice to save money in the 80s, yes. Alpha Omega says, you could get venture capital just for an idea. Credentialism, yeah, that's a good point, yeah. Alright, so here we go. I'm going to bring up what I believe is the greatest commercial in the history of humanity. Yeah, we are so getting flagged for copyright for this.
It doesn't matter what comes, fresh goes better in life. With Mentos fresh and full of life, nothing gets to you. Staying fresh, staying cool. With Mentos fresh and full of life, fresh goes better with Mentos fresh. Fresh goes better with Mentos fresh and full of life. Mentos, the fresh maker.
Was that awesome or what? Does that encompass that 80s better than just about anything else? It's all about Mentos. As soon as Mentos stopped being popular, it was all over for Western society. I mean, that might be the tipping point. That might have actually been the tipping point. Hope everybody enjoyed another edition of the MINDSHOCK podcast. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.